Jonah is a bit of a cantankerous fellow. How enviable to have such a significant calling from God. And yet Jonah ran in the opposite direction. Now I get it, Moses, he didn't think he could talk right, and he felt inadequate. I understand why he ran. But when it comes to Jonah, he fled because he knew he would be successful in what God had called him to do. He knew the Ninevites would respond to God's mercy. And yet, maybe Jonah wasn't cantankerous at all. Maybe he was just plain mean. Or maybe not. The people of Nineveh were enemies of his people, and the thought of them escaping doom was more than Jonah could bear. So he ran away, or sailed away, to be a bit more precise. As we heard the story today, a big storm stirred up, and with the waves crashing down on the boat, the crew took the time to cast lots, and they learned that Jonah was the reason for this storm. As Jonah, in this whole story, confounds us, he once more does the same. Because he didn't fight the crew when they learned that he was the source of the problem. Instead, he encouraged them to throw him overboard. They'd be safe. And he would rather face his chances in the watery depths than to have them simply turn the boat around if it meant that they would all be safe, and he would do what God had called him to do. But it isn't as easy for Jonah as that. The waters did not bring an end to his story, which he would have delighted in. Instead, he was swallowed up into this purgatory of a whale's belly. Not quite alive, definitely not quite dead. And in the belly of that big fish, Jonah realized he needed the very thing that he was withholding from the people of Nineveh. He needed mercy from God. And he prayed, and God showed him mercy, and that big fish spat Jonah out onto the dry land of the beach. You'd think at this point, Jonah might have a change of heart. But at this point, he was no more excited about his calling than before. But running wasn't going to do much, so he went to Nineveh to do the thing that God had told him to do, to offer a word of warning and the mercy that God had intended for the people there. Now, as much as I would love for us to do a character analysis of Jonah, because this is a wild character, it's the other actor in the story who's most worthy of our attention. Let's consider for a few moments Jonah's God. We've already seen by Jonah's actions that God is supremely merciful, merciful beyond comprehension. He offered mercy to Jonah, indeed, mercy to the sailors on the ship who could have gone down with him, mercy to the inhabitants of Nineveh. And one of the signs of that mercy in this story is just how patient God is. God is patient enough to give Nineveh, the enemies of God's people, the time to hear a warning and a call to change their ways. God is certainly patient enough to give Jonah the time he needs to be persuaded that he needs to be the messenger of that message. For some reason, though, God didn't want to find another messenger. Surely there was someone on the earth who would have been compliant with what God had asked. But God, in patience, was undeterred by Jonah's obstinance. It's interesting. In one place in Scripture, God made a donkey into a messenger. But here, when it came to the redemption of the enemies of Jonah, God was set that Jonah needed to be that messenger. And through this story, God shows that God has enough time to wait for Jonah to do the job. When it comes to God's most important work, God works through and with human agents. Over the course of this month of September, we're going to be talking a lot about agency, about being agents. In basic form, agency is the understanding that we have what we need to do what God has called us to do. As a church, we've gained some clarity about what God has called us to do. A few years back now, we discerned 4 missional priorities. Jerry's already referenced those this morning. 4 areas of focus that have since aligned our ministry structure, as well as guiding our work within and beyond these walls, and even literally guiding how we think about these walls. The renovation project that's coming to an end was guided by our missional priorities too. These ways of being give us a shape and understanding of who we are to be and what God has called us to do. And as we become more clear, not only of what God has called us to do, but about our ability, our agency to fulfill our missional priorities, it's then that we will act upon what God has called us to. I believe the signs are becoming clearer, that we are getting clearer on our agency. Recently, a young person I had not met, out of the blue, emailed me to ask if they could be involved in our spiritual formation activities here, because they were intrigued by the way that we are connecting to God, to nature, and to one another through small group opportunities. I'm happy to say that that young person has met with Stephanie and with Jane and is helping plan some new opportunities, including the Holy Well event coming up. People are recognizing our courageous public witness as well. You may have seen my face on a screen more times than you would like the course of this last week, or read more quotes from me than you want to hear. That all came after several of us joined with hundreds of others as we accompanied immigrants who were told that they would have to pass through a CRPD checkpoint before they went into the Homeland Security Investigations Office for their ICE check-in. Our communications director, Andy Lewis, shared some of that on our Facebook page across social media. And there was a comment there of a young mother who, and I'm paraphrasing just a bit here, said, "I'm not religious, but my daughter has some questions about faith. And this is the kind of community I would want for her to be a part of." I was glad that Becca was right on it to respond immediately. And Barb Hansen offered some encouragement as well. Words of affirmation and words of invitation. In times of isolation and deep concern and uncertainty that seems to be mounting, the world needs messengers of mercy. And for us, that means living out the values and the priorities that we have discerned God has called us to. Because, as it was with Jonah, when it comes to God's most important work, God works with and through human agents. I go back to that story of Jonah for just a moment. As serious as that story may seem, Jonah is a little bit silly as well. Now, I realized I left it out of your summary, Bruce, but after the word had been heard and the king said, we got to do something serious, not only did he call the people to sackcloth and ashes and to changing their ways, he also said, all your animals need to be in sackcloth and ashes as well. So I want you for just a second to imagine a CAFO full of cattle wearing sackcloth and covered in ashes, because the king commanded that everyone needs to change their course. And yet in the silliness of this story, Jonah concludes with an awfully serious, open-ended question for us. You might remember Jonah did what God had instructed Jonah to do. He wasn't happy about it, but he preached in Nineveh as he was supposed to. And then he left that city and found a spot to watch over it from a distance. I imagine scoffing and still hoping that God might not be quite as merciful as he knew God to be. Maybe God would still wipe them out. But as Jonah watched, he got uncomfortable. It was hot sitting in that spot. And so once more, God offered him mercy in the form of a shady bush. But God also wasn't done messing with Jonah. So in the nighttime, God sent a worm that destroyed the bush that provided the shade. And here is the moment where God brings the matter into focus. If you, Jonah, are so concerned about your momentary shady relief, why don't you think that I should care about the most important matter of offering mercy, bringing in people to this community of love, and making a way of hope for people who need it most? Now, that was a big question for Jonah. And I believe that is the question for us as well. God has called us to do some important and big things in this city. But the question is, will our desire for comfort consume us? Or are we serious about God's work of sending agents of mercy to people who most need mercy?